The screen cast a harsh crimson glow across the room. Maya watched the numbers. They were not just changing, they were plummeting. 30% of her portfolio vanished in the span of a single night. She leaned closer, her breath shallow, as the red digits continued their downward crawl. The apartment remained silent, a stark, steady hum of air conditioning and distant city noise that felt entirely disconnected from the digital carnage unfolding on her monitor. She had spent years mastering blockchain protocols and decentralized finance, yet none of that knowledge stopped the tide. Her pulse thrummed against her throat. She gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. This was not a correction, it was a collapse. Every refresh of the page confirmed the same truth. The ground she had built her life upon was actively sliding away. She stared at the total value, watching it sink toward a number that meant something far more significant than just a loss of capital. It was a threat to everything she had secured. She pushed back from the desk, the chair legs scraping sharply against the floor, but the screen kept flickering, relentless and cold, mocking the hours she had spent chasing the volatility of the market. Maya stood up. She walked to the kitchen counter, leaving the glow of the monitor behind. She found a leather-bound notebook and a pen. The paper was crisp, heavy, and silent. She sat down, took a breath, and let the silence of the room settle into her bones. She wrote 3 headers at the top of the page. Build cash flow. Reduce dependency. Create long-term freedom. Her handwriting was sharp, deliberate, and final. She reached for a dog-eared book by Napoleon Hill, flipping through pages she had not touched in years. She stopped at a chapter on organized planning. The concepts felt heavy and slow compared to the frantic speed of crypto, but that was the point. She stopped thinking about the next price spike. She began to map out a system that functioned regardless of market sentiment. She crossed out the notes she had kept on trade volume and liquidity pools. She replaced them with a new list: fixed assets, monthly yields, and safety margins. The panic that had gripped her chest slowly ebbed, replaced by the mechanical rhythm of a pen scratching against paper. She was not just calculating numbers anymore. She was designing a foundation. Every word she wrote felt like an anchor catching in the seabed, holding her steady against the tide. Maya traded the frantic glow of the charts for rows of spreadsheets, tax maps, and municipal zoning reports. Her peers kept their eyes locked on the digital ticker, chasing the next speculative spike. While she spent weeks measuring rental demand in neighborhoods they deemed irrelevant, she learned the math of financing rates, the hidden drain of maintenance costs, and the cold reality of property taxes. It was slow. It was tedious. There was no adrenaline, only the steady accumulation of facts. She spent her weekends driving through suburbs, walking the perimeter of properties, and checking the condition of brickwork and roofs. People asked why she was wasting time on such antiquated assets. She did not explain. She just kept digging. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, she found it. A modest, weathered duplex sitting on a corner lot. It lacked the sleek interface of a digital wallet and the instant liquidity of a token, but it was solid. She stood on the sidewalk, watching the way the late sun hit the siding, and realized she was looking at something the market could not delete. It was heavy. It was permanent. It was exactly what she had been searching for to anchor her future. The office was quiet, smelling of stale coffee and industrial carpet. Maya sat at the edge of a heavy oak table, the stack of documents laid out before her like a map of a new life. Her pulse hammered against her wrists. She looked at the signature line. It required her name, her commitment, and the entirety of her liquid savings. For years, she had moved money with the click of a button, entries that could be erased in a heartbeat. This was different. This was a deed. She picked up the pen, feeling the weight of it in her grip. Her hand trembled, not from weakness, but from the sudden, sharp clarity of the stakes. She thought of the duplex on the corner, the physical structure of it, the way the brick felt under her palm. She exhaled, steadying her breath, and pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed, black and permanent. She signed the first page, then the second. Each stroke was a severance from her past habits. As she finished the final document, the silence in the room shifted. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space waiting to be filled. She pushed the folder across the table. The deal was done. She was no longer just an observer of markets. She was an owner of land. Maya walked back into her apartment, but the space felt entirely different. The familiar hum of the refrigerator and the soft light of the city through the window no longer signaled a sanctuary of passive observation. Instead, the air felt dense with the gravity of her decision. She sat at her desk, reaching out of habit to wake her laptop, but her fingers stopped inches from the trackpad. The digital charts, usually the center of her world, suddenly looked like flickering shadows on a wall. She pulled her hand back. The duplex was out there now, a physical reality she was bound to by contract and debt. Every square foot of that building was tied to her signature. She stood up and walked to the window, watching the skyline, realizing that she was no longer just managing a portfolio of numbers. She was managing a structure that required time, attention, and physical care. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was the quiet of a threshold. She was responsible for the foundation, the roof, and the tenants. For the first time in her life, the volatility of the market felt distant, replaced by the immediate, pressing consciousness of being an owner. The sound started as a dull hiss, then escalated into a violent, rhythmic spraying against metal. Maya bolted upright at 3 in the morning. The silence of the apartment shattered. She sprinted toward the utility room, her bare feet splashing into a pool of water that had already claimed the floor. The water heater was failing. A jagged puncture in the side of the tank was venting pressurized water, spraying a mist that coated the walls and pooled deep around her ankles. She lunged for the shutoff valve, but the handle was slick and burning hot. She grabbed a towel, wrapped it around her hand, and twisted with everything she had. The metal groaned, bit into her palm, and finally gave way. The spraying stopped, leaving only the sound of dripping water echoing in the dark. She stood there, chest heaving, her hands coated in grit and rust. There were no charts to check here, no algorithms to optimize, and no buttons to undo the damage. She grabbed a mop and a bucket, dropping to her knees to start the work of scrubbing the floor. The damp cold seeped into her skin, a sharp, undeniable reminder of the physical cost of her new path. She worked in the dark, every muscle aching, learning the true weight of what it meant to own. The exhaustion of the repair lingered for days, a dull ache in her shoulders. Maya returned to her desk, the screen glowing with the familiar, frantic red of the markets, but the numbers no longer pulled at her focus. She heard the mail carrier drop a single envelope through the slot. She stood, walked to the door, and picked it up. It was heavy, textured paper, not a digital notification. She tore the seal and pulled out the check. It was not a speculative gain born from a market swing or a lucky trade. It was rent. A precise, expected, recurring sum. She held the paper, watching the ink catch the light. The erratic anxiety that had defined her life for years began to settle. She looked at the check, then back at the charts on her monitor. The difference was absolute. One was a gamble, the other was an engine. She tapped the desk, the sound firm and rhythmic. Her psychology shifted in that moment. She was no longer a person waiting for a price to rise, but a person managing an asset that paid for its own existence. The speculative itch faded, replaced by the calm, steady resolve of an owner who finally understood the difference between chasing growth and planting roots. Maya began to operate in two distinct worlds. She kept her digital assets, but they no longer dictated her peace of mind. Instead, she treated them as high-growth potential, balanced by the bedrock of her properties. When the markets dipped, the old instinct to panic flickered, but she silenced it with a ledger. She looked at her rental income, the steady, predictable flow of cash, and reminded herself that her foundation was already secured. One afternoon, a sharp crash wiped out a significant percentage of her digital portfolio. A year ago, this would have sent her into a spiral of sleepless nights and frantic trading. Now, she simply closed the laptop. She walked to her property, checked the exterior, and confirmed the tenants were settled. The physical reality of the building didn't care about the digital charts. She reinvested her rental earnings into the dips, buying low with capital that was not borrowed, but earned. Her strategy became a machine of calculated risk. She was no longer gambling on the hope of a spike. She was building an ecosystem. By the time the markets recovered, her total net worth had climbed, not through luck, but through the deliberate, steady accumulation of assets that worked in tandem. She had successfully decoupled her survival from the volatility of the screen. Years later, Maya sat in a bright corner cafe. A young man leaned forward across the table, his eyes darting to his phone every few seconds. He was looking for a shortcut. He asked for the name of the next big token, the one that would change his life overnight. Maya watched him for a moment, noting the familiar frantic energy she once carried. She pushed her coffee cup aside, creating a clear space on the table between them. "The most important investment I ever made was that first duplex," she said. The young man paused, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion. He had expected a secret code, not a story about brick and mortar. Maya leaned in. She explained that the building taught her things no digital chart ever could. It demanded patience. It forced her to manage actual risk. It turned her focus from the speed of gains to the stability of the system. She watched the realization settle in his expression as he put his phone face down on the table. She didn't give him a tip. She gave him a blueprint. Success, she told him, was not a sudden strike of luck. It was the result of a deliberate, organized plan that turned volatile energy into lasting power. The young man eventually left, carrying the weight of a new perspective rather than a quick tip. Maya stayed behind, watching the city pulse through the glass. Outside, the street was a blur of movement, people rushing toward uncertain goals, their faces lit by the glow of handheld screens. She felt none of that old urgency. The panic that once defined her existence had been replaced by a quiet, steady rhythm. She looked at her reflection in the window, seeing a person who no longer feared the shifting tides of the market. The duplex, that unglamorous structure of brick and mortar, stood as a silent witness to her transformation. It was not a grand monument or a high-tech marvel, yet it held the weight of her future. She realized that for years, she had mistaken speed for power and volatility for opportunity. Now she understood the truth. The most boring investment she ever made was the only one that truly secured her freedom. She stood up, gathered her things, and walked out into the afternoon light. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, and for the first time in her life, she was not chasing the horizon, but living within the foundation she had built with her own hands.